Let's talk about the operating system for global finance. What if I told you it's running on ancient, fragile code? That it's basically just a massive, precarious stack of promises? Well, today we're going to explore a proposed replacement for that entire system, one built not on trust, but on pure, cold, hard, mathematical certainty. Okay, let's dive right in. This one sentence, it really just says it all, doesn't it? It captures this fundamental philosophical shift we're about to unpack. It's about moving away from a world where we accept claims on faith to a world where value is secured and transferred based on proof that anyone can verify. So what is this fragile stack exactly? Think of it like this. When you're moving value through the traditional system, from a custodian to a broker to a clearinghouse, you're not actually moving the asset itself. Not really. You're just moving IOUs. You're passing along a promise that the asset exists somewhere. And every single step in that chain adds another layer of risk, another cost, and of course, a whole lot of delay. And that brings us to the central question, the big what if. What if we could just collapse that entire fragile stack of promises into a single, instantaneous, verifiable step? This is where an asset called mathematical gold, or MG, comes into the picture. It's designed to provide exactly that kind of certainty. But before we get to the solution, you really have to understand the problem. And the source material frames it as the trust paradox. It's this pretty strange reality we live in, where incredibly familiar yet totally unprovable systems are just accepted without question, while new, mathematically verifiable systems are often met with skepticism. Okay, now let's put these two side by side, because this is where it gets really clear. On the left, you've got your standard MT-103 wire transfer. At its core, it's just a text message, a promise. There's zero proof of collateral attached. You have to literally give up custody of your asset to even start the process, and it takes days to settle. But on the right, well, that's a different world. Using something called the Flame API, you get a mathematical proof, not a promise. The collateral is right there, verifiable on-chain. Settlement is almost instant. And, crucially, you never lose custody of the asset that enables the transaction. And this massive difference is what leads us to a whole new paradigm. We're talking about a shift from a system that's governed by human trust and enforced by courts to a system governed by immutable mathematical truth. The source material calls this a mathematical jurisdiction. So what on earth does that term actually mean? Well, a mathematical jurisdiction is a framework where the final say, the ultimate decider of what's true, isn't a judge or an auditor, it's the math itself. Any verification, any dispute, any enforcement, it's all resolved through cryptographic proof. And the blockchain acts as that final, unchangeable record of truth. This table just lays it out so perfectly. In the old trust jurisdiction, verification is just a custodian saying, hey, trust us. The records are internal, they're editable. In enforcement, that comes down to courts and human discretion. But in a mathematical jurisdiction, verification changes from trust us to verify me. It's a 24/7 cryptographic proof, the record is an immutable public ledger, and enforcement is automatic, handled by deterministic smart contracts. The key takeaway here is that the very authorization for a transaction is no longer a human promise. It is the mathematical proof. So we've covered the what and the why. Now let's get into the how. How does this system actually, mechanically, deliver on that promise of certainty? According to the source, mathematical gold is engineered from the ground up to eliminate some of the most, let's say, predatory parts of traditional finance. Because the asset is never actually pledged or locked up, there's no need for side-by-side collateral. And if nothing is pledged, well, you can't foreclose on it. Because it enables funding without creating debt, the cycle of debt bondage is broken. And finally, because smart contracts handle everything automatically, counterparty risk just disappears. All this talk of verifying math can feel a little abstract, I get it. So to make it more concrete, let's use a simple analogy the source material brings up. How do you prove a delivery was actually made? Let's call it the Santa Claus problem. In the old world of finance, you pretty much have to operate on trust. You have to believe Santa came. You have to believe the transaction happened like they said it did. And then later on, you might pay a very expensive auditor to come in and verify the records to, check if the chimney was used. It's slow, it's expensive, and it's ultimately based on faith. But in the new world, this mathematical jurisdiction, you don't have to believe anything. You just verify. You get an instant, public cryptographic proof of delivery, the transaction hash on the ledger. Anyone, anywhere on the planet can check it in seconds. It replaces that old promissory note with a cold, hard, mathematical fact. Okay, this is all fascinating from a technological and philosophical point of view. But for a financial institution, there's really only one question that matters. What does this do for my balance sheet? So let's get practical and talk about the institutional bottom line.
The very first impact is a big one. Under international banking rules, like Basel III, mathematical gold is designed to qualify as a gold equivalent reserve asset, and that means it gets a 0% risk-weighted asset classification. In plain English, banks can hold it on their books without having to set aside extra capital to cover potential losses. This instantly makes their capital ratio stronger, which is a huge deal for financial stability. Next up is speed. We're talking about a final settlement time of around 12 seconds. That's T+0, which means it's instant for all intents and purposes. Now, just compare that for a second to the 2 to 5 days it takes for a SWIFT wire to clear. The jump in efficiency is just staggering. It's not just about saving time, it's about eliminating settlement risk and freeing up trillions of dollars in capital that's currently stuck in transit around the world.
And of course, you have to look at the revenue. The source material projects that a $10 billion position in this asset could generate some really significant recurring revenue streams. When you add it all up, from lending leverage to custody services to other fees, the potential is estimated at over $8.6 billion in the first year.
So how would an institution actually do this? It really comes down to 3 immediate, powerful applications. First, you hold it as a reserve asset to beef up those capital ratios. Second, you use it for peer-to-peer transfers to settle massive deals in seconds, completely bypassing correspondent bank fees. And third, you can seamlessly convert it back to fiat currencies like the dollar or the euro, ensuring it's always a liquid asset. The cost savings here are also pretty mind-blowing. And that's because this system doesn't just chip away at fees. It completely eliminates entire categories of operational costs. Clearing and settlement fees, liquidation costs, all those man-hours spent on reconciliation, a lot of that just vanishes. This could lead to savings of up to 95% on high-value transactions.
All right, let's pull back and look at the big picture here, because this really brings us to a larger, almost philosophical point about the very nature of money itself.
Here's the core idea. We could be looking at a shift away from what the sources call representational finance, a world full of claims and symbols that just point to value, to something called substantive finance, where the asset you hold is the actual value.
There's this quote in the documentation that just nails it. It perfectly captures the principle of mathematical gold. It is designed to be this perpetual, non-depleting asset. The reserve exists. The reserve enables. The reserve remains. It's always there, in your custody, doing its job.
And this right here shows the strategic evolution for a financial institution. Their entire role in the economy could change. They stop being a slow, clunky toll booth operator that profits from friction and delay. Instead, they become a high-speed engine of value flow, a sovereign node of transmission in the global economy.
And so we end on this question. It's a provocative one, and it really gets to the heart of this whole thing. What actually happens to our global financial architecture when the very definition of money shifts from a promise you have to trust to a mathematical substance that anyone can verify? Think about that.